And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection, your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. Born in Alert Bay, Ellen Neal learned to carve during the 1920s from her grandfather, the eminent master carver Charlie James, at a time when Indigenous art of carving was banned in Canada under the Indian Act. She then launched her artistic career in the 1940s during the potlatch prohibition when carving was rare. We begin today's Open Connection with Ellen's granddaughter, Luann Neal.
I always talk about my grandmother because I always felt like she never got the recognition she deserved during her life and even in the years since. And then listeners tracked me down and said, hey, we've got a carving of your grandmother's. I actually had two other couples who also had not fully finished pieces that their parents had same story as this one, had specifically asked for an unfinished piece. There must have been something about that back in the 20s and 30s. People were fascinated to see something unfinished. And so those pieces came back to me. And when this piece came back, it was right when I was trying to figure out how to refine this eagle mask I'd been working on for quite a few years. I'm just learning on my own. And when I lined up this piece with the other three pieces I'd received, it gave me a perfect sequence of how each phase of the carving that I'm working on, how that should go. So needless to say, I've gotten a lot further probably since receiving this piece than I have in previous years, but it's just absolutely a joy because it feels like my grandmother still gets to mentor me through her pieces and through these pieces that are at different phases of being complete. We were very fortunate that when I got into junior high school, which I guess is now called middle school, the first, I guess they called it a native curriculum back then, was introduced to our school here in Victoria. And so we had First Nations social studies, language, and art. And so we were fortunate to have as our main teacher, George Hunt Jr., who learned through the Hunt family, and the Hunt family learned from Mungo Martin, and Mungo Martin was my grandmother's uncle. So there was this really wonderful connection that was, and I didn't even know about my grandmother at the time I started doing the art. So, I had no idea of how prolific she was in the art world, because nobody ever talked about women. They always talked about the guys who were carvers and not the women. And but the more I learned, George Hunt Jr., I asked him one time, are women allowed to carve? Because I keep hearing a message that we're not allowed to carve. And he said, I wouldn't be teaching you if you weren't allowed. And it's not a matter of allowed, it's who has the talent and how do we nurture that talent. And so you're here, so you're going to learn. So yeah, it continued on. And then after that, I pretty much just gone on my own. I attended Emily Carr, and there was a really excellent teacher at the time, Luke Parnell, who just started a carving course at Emily Carr the year I started attending. So I got to refine a little bit of my skills through his help. And then the rest has been researching museum pieces and just practicing on my own. When I got this piece, my hands were just shaking. I was already probably anticipation of it, but when it actually was sat in my hands, I could feel this wonderful energy, this like getting a hug from a long time ago relative, someone you haven't seen in a long time. So it felt really special. And it also, I think, just gave me that little reminder that when you're given that ability and that desire to carve or do our forms of art, you don't take that lightly. Take it not so much seriously, but take it to heart and do your best job with it, and you can't go wrong. So that energy is what I kept feeling was, here's something else to help you along your journey. I really always wanted to try carving early on, just because I liked the idea of shaping something solid. I guess I've always been an artist, and the curiosity of how could you take knives and actually shape wood like that. And of course, I grew up when I was in Alert Bay, where I was born, and then when we moved to Victoria, there's always our art everywhere, and it just fascinated me that you could create something on that scale, from very tiny to huge, and I just always wanted to be a part of it. I never saw myself ever making totem poles by myself, but just even being a part of it, even doing the painting part and getting my hands on it, it all, I think, informs the rest of my artistic practice.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. In 1947, Ellen Neal opened a retail outlet in Stanley Park, the Totem Arts Shop. Neal was also an important role model and mentor for young artists such as Bill Reed, Art Thompson, and Robert Davidson. It's hard to imagine Northwest Coast art world today without the foundation laid by Neal. Let us return to the conversation as Luann shares how artists influence each other.
What I've really noticed over the years that I've been studying other artists' work and just trying to get an idea of where I want to go with my work, what is it that I want to do differently? What I really found was that I was working on a mask that two other carvers that I asked for a little help along the way had really shaped the way they make and with the way they had learned to do the beaks of thunderbirds and other birds and eagles. And so that was the part I noticed the most. I didn't like the way the beak was, and I thought it doesn't feel right, it doesn't look right. When I study my grandmother's pieces, I've got my hands running all over and getting a real sense of how the width feels, how the tapering feels. So I'd hold my mask and go, it's all wrong. But it took a while to figure out, learning about the grain of the wood and which direction my knife would go, which knife to use in the first place, and not getting too ahead of myself. You know, you get really anxious when you're learning something new, and that's the thing. I always have to pull the reins and go, calm down, take this really slowly. So I'm literally whittling the skinniest little pieces of wood off of the surface of my mask, because I don't want it, because once you take too much off, you can't do anything about it. So it's helped me to get even more patient with my carving, not so anxious about getting it done. I just keep thinking, I think this one mask is probably 15 years old. Hey, you've had 15 years at it already, another 5 ain't gonna hurt. So I think that's been really helpful. And also just now understanding how with this piece that came back to me and seeing how it was just a rough cut, definitely changes the way I would approach doing my rough cuts. I now have more information about that. I was taught some of that in my carving class in high school, but I never got to practice it. So unless you practice it, you don't have your own method yet. So I'm still very much developing that method. Repatriation, I think that there's a couple of layers. This instance where this piece didn't travel the usual path, which is often through a museum or a private collector. Well, there was a private collector in this instance, but private collections like in galleries, city archives, those sorts of places, those can be more complex because there's always the question of how the piece came to be in the hands of other people. And so when I worked as a repatriation specialist for the museum here in Victoria, it was very complex because there weren't a lot of reference notes. The notes that were there were pretty skimpy. But I'd also met a lot of communities in my past work, helping people learn how to write grants. And so I kind of had an idea of which tribe it belonged to and then how to contact them and how to go about that. I think some of the tricky part is making sure that pieces get back to their original families, because they usually come from families. It can be really easy in a museum setting, for instance, or a private collection to attribute it to the wrong nation and then start sending things back to the wrong people. and that causes all kinds of other layers of problems. I think the other thing too is what's important about it, if I can speak just from an artist perspective and not as a repatriation specialist, as an artist, that energy for one, feeling that energy that I really felt is my grandmother's energy, and being able to know with a great deal of confidence that I'm going to be able to continue her style, what she started and what she taught all of her children plus many others, that I'm going to be able to continue that. And that's really important when you come from a culture where things get passed down through families. Entire artists are families of artists. So it helped me ground myself and have a really extra strong sense of connection. I already felt like I had a good sense of that. But this somehow added to that. And I just think that's beautiful when people can do that. And that many of these pieces also contain, they are manifestations of many of our origin legends and histories of our people. And that a lot of that's been taken out of our communities as well. So being able to bring back an actual physical piece, getting the story behind it, finding out which origin story or history it tells, really helps an individual to continue all those other aspects of your culture. It's really interesting for me to see language being taught, culture being taught, art being taught as though they're separate things. And they're so interconnected in our communities. And I think that we're still putting those pieces back together. I just wanted to say how a huge thanks again to Nikita and Kelly at the Frida Deasing School. I was so thrilled to arrive there at the school. The initial purpose was for me to come and talk with the students about all things art. And it absolutely filled my heart with joy to see how many women there were in the class. I've been saying this for as long as I can remember. I just really want to keep encouraging girls and women to take up art practices that they may have been discouraged. It's not just carving, but any art practice that we've been discouraged from being involved in. Because, I mean, when I get in, we call it the zone, when you get in the zone, that creative zone, and you don't even hear anything around you anymore, that's good for your health. It's good for your soul. And I don't think anyone should be denied that. So for all our artists who have hesitated or think they don't have any talent, we all have talent. I want people to really feel like, even if they don't become a professional artist, they should learn the ways of our art, because there's some great healing in there.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. He has been sculpting and carving for more than 50 years. His family lived in the Skeene River area, where his father was a trapper, but by 1952, the trapping trade had become an unsustainable way to support their family. So they moved to Port Edward that year, where work was available at North Pacific Cannery. Let us return the conversation as Dempsey Bob reflects on his latest art installation.
Because what happens in life is you are where you are by what you did and what you didn't do. That's where you're at. I realize when I see my retrospective and it shows all my pieces, I spent years by myself, working, thinking, being creative. That's a lot of, because when you look at my pieces, you look at my intelligence, my skill, knowledge, my wisdom, my talents, myself. That's what you see. That's my life. That's what it is. That's what I realized about trying pieces. And they were like my children, And I looked at all these pieces, seen this one little basket, was looking at me, and he's just like he was saying to me, "Where the hell you been, Dad? It's 40 years. I haven't seen you for 40 years." Then there was one of the masks I didn't like. I didn't think it was good. Didn't work but I made it work with it. And we ended up at the National Museum in Ottawa. So I thought, well, they don't even know what's good, you know. So anyways, but I got to see him again. And then, like, people that missed it, like, you don't have to see them again. They're all in private collection, most of them. A lot are in museums, but most of them are private collections. You just never see them again. Well, they encouraged me and they told me stories. And they were behind me. Like, when I was going to go to art school, you know, some people were negative and said, you know, think it's going to do you any good, you know, stuff like that. And, you know, to be an artist, it's a long struggle. You know, like to play years, you know, like just to learn, right? You know, and I was lucky I started when I was younger, you know, and I grew up like, but how they supported me was telling me the stories, teaching me the culture, teaching me the songs, traditional songs, dances, how to make regalia, you know, things like that, basically with stories. And also, too, they supported me mentally and, you know, like encouragement, you know, to continue. And they told me stuff. And they told me about my great-grandfather, who was an artist, carver. He was a carver from Alaska, Kentucky. And what he made, how he worked, you know, told me what he believed, that how he approached his work, that all that stuff, you know, they told me all that stuff. And then they told me tour how the culture was, and they told me about excellence, like you know, like my grandfather said, if you don't do it well, you know, good, best, don't do it. That's what it's for. And then my grandmother said to me too, my great aunt, Ema Carlin, she said, when we show our family's face, that means our wolf crest on our blankets, on our bracelets. She said, that's who we are, she said. And then she said too that when we show our face, our design, our masks, our garb, it's got to be the best. And that's what I stuck to all blue lines, but I like it. The quality, one has a quality in it, do it.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
One of the most quoted lines from Bruce Lee is, I fear not the man who has practiced 10,000 kicks once, but I fear the man who has practiced one kick 10,000 times. It's a quote that emphasizes the importance of focused practice and a high level of proficiency. In this final segment of Open Connection, Dempsey shares why Frida Diesing sent him to teach children.
When I started with Frida, I didn't want to draw, you know, I just wanted to carve because I love carving. I just wanted to carve, but anyways, Frida sent me to Alaska to teach the young kids. And after I drew about 10,000 ovoids and U shapes and all the traditional shapes, I realized that's why she sent me. But I learned how to draw, because what was holding me back was the drawing. This is all drawing. I drew all this on free and on the wood, right on the wood I drew it with every line. I carved every line, painting the lines, and cleaning up the lines, and sanding it, and that was it. But it's all drawing. It comes from the drawing. And it's the foundation of art. So your drawing it's the foundation. And that's what Frida, because what I did was I was holding myself back because I couldn't draw. You know, I hit my own wall, colored wall, because I couldn't draw, you know. But once I learned, and then I started to, my pieces started to get better, you know, because drawing teaches you to see. Because most people are blind. People look, but they don't see. Artists train themselves to see. And I feel things, and I can see things. People don't know, because I know form, I know sculpture. You only see what you really know. That's what I realized. You only see what you really know. You don't know it, you don't see it. And that's what happens to most people. That's why I'm always looking to train myself. But the drawing trains you to see. Drawing trains you to the proportions, get your proportions right in your sculpture, and teaches you movement. Because if you can't draw it, your pieces are like this, stick, empty. And it's got to have light, and it's got to have movement. And that's where I try to get in my drawing, like, or freehand, you know what I mean? Like, just, that's what's really important. And I've always worked at that, you know. I'm an artist. That's a true artist. You have to do it. I don't know why, but you have to do it. And that's what I am. I've been doing it all my life now. But I stuck to it. I was really lucky because I wanted to quit. I couldn't get anywhere. I couldn't get any recognition. And I wanted to quit, but something just kept me. It's too stubborn. And I asked my friend to tell about every day. I said, did you ever think I'd make it in the art? He said, yeah. Oh, yeah, I knew. I said, what do you mean? He said, I knew because we're so goddamn stubborn, he said. And that's what I did. I was stubborn. Never gave up. That's how I did it, Toy. I never gave up. And I knew, it was important. About art is important. Because culture is important. Culture is very important. It gives you it's spiritual. It's not just it's who you are. Because if you don't know your history, you don't know yourself. You don't know, you get lost. And that's why we're not good. Still got some of, not all of it, but we got some of. And that's why we got this, and that's the art is my life. That's what I do. When you look at my artists, my children, I attend my church, I look at my art. And when we were kids, we always had to be the best. Whatever we did, we the best. But do the best, and that's how it felt when I go back, And I remember all the stuff I carved, when I was young, and things that happened at the town, some crazy things, good things. And I remember there was those days that I don't know, you'll never see them again. Really, it's gone, and it's the feeling. Sorry. Because I think, during the 50s, it was a creative time. Rock and roll was coming back, and almost people were happy about it, and it was different. We woke up a lot of people. I was all those guys, and also the blues. It was lots of good. That's great music. 60s too, like that too.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.